Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the third round of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup, which took place in Tabor. I was in Tabor myself with the Eurocross Academy and I saw two amazing junior races, and now we are on our way back to the Netherlands. With me here to discuss the men and women's elite race is, as usual, Issam. Issam, welcome.
Hey everybody, thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoyed your time at Tabor.
So let's start off by talking about the men's race. We have had two races in the United States. Both wins were won by Iserbyt. Today in Tabor, no difference, although it was a pretty close race for most of the race. It was a pretty slow start in the first lap. It was a reckon lap, just like we saw in Fayetteville. Then in the middle part of the race, we had a group of 5 riders getting away. Iserbyt with his teammate van Toerenhout, Lars van der Haar, Sweeck, and Quinten Hermans, who was riding his first World Cup race of the season here. They got caught again, but it was clear that these 5 riders were the strongest, as they almost immediately broke away from the rest again. After that we had an attack. Well, was it an attack? It was a very sneaky attack by Iserbyt with 3 laps to go, and he opened a small gap. Sweeck tried his best to close that gap again, but unfortunately for Sweeck and the rest, he wasn't able to do that. 1 second became 2 seconds, 2 became 4, and 4 became 8. Only when the gap was 12 seconds, Lars van der Haar attacked from the wheel of Sweeck. Lars looked to be closing the gap a little bit, but he eventually fell short. At 8 seconds he couldn't come closer, and that's how Iserbyt cruised towards his third World Cup win of the season, ahead of Lars van der Haar in second, and eventually Michael van Toerenhout still overtook Sweeck for that third spot on the podium. So Issam, the win again for Iserbyt. Was that a surprise for you? Did you expect Lars van der Haar to win, maybe?
I mean, I expected Van der Haar definitely to bring up the fight to Iserbyt. I have heard that he was sick for 5 days before the race, after his return from the United States. That will definitely not help you, but it was not visible during the race. It was it definitely not showed that he had that illness. He was riding a smart race. He didn't really take a lot of initiative, made sure that the others were doing that. Van Toerenhout and Iserbyt were playing their games, and Sweeck had to react all the time. Hermans was also working a lot, was doing his job, his part of the pulling in the beginning of the race. And, Van der Haar, tried to sit in the wheels. In the end, he tried to react and get Iserbyt back. But on this parkour, it's very difficult to get a gap. But then also it's very difficult to get back to the others, especially if you have somebody like Iserbyt at the front who was having a very good day. Iserbyt didn't make that many mistakes, went very well through corners, the barriers went well as well. So it was a good day for him, a perfect day almost. And, there's not a lot you can do about it. And Van der Haar tried, but just came a little bit short. If you can, it's not really a surprise that Iserbyt won, looking at his previous results.
Based on the season so far, not really a big surprise. He's been the strongest, and today he made the difference technically, but he eventually drained them physically. He made that small gap in the technical section in the infield just after the start-finish section, and then eventually just kept putting the power down. And for Sweeck, I think some were hoping that he would do better, especially after the fight we saw in Fayetteville, that we really had a battle there. But I don't know how you think about it, but Sweeck, he also raced Ardooie on Thursday. I think they paid him some big bucks to come to the start, because after a long travel, we know Sweeck is always somebody who is very complaining about the travel. He's always talking about the jet lag, and of course the jet lag is a factor, but then to immediately race Ardooie just 1 or 2 days after you come back and then go to Tabor, maybe all a bit too much.
I mean, they can definitely play a role for Sweeck. Sweeck was definitely in the race, the one taking the most initiative. He tried to cover the team tactics of Sweeck and of Michael van Toerenhout and Iserbyt. And then, Sweeck always tried to be that second guy in between them, and that definitely cost some energy. The race in Ardooie, I think that he didn't go all in, looking at his results. And it was a race that was close by his residential area, so for him it was probably a financial reasoning behind that or something similar. And then you sometimes take those decisions, but it can definitely add up on this race. This is a race with small margins, so you don't want to really you want to be as fresh as possible at such a race, and that could have add up. On top of that, definitely the race itself, where he took a lot of initiative, like I said, tried to close the gaps. He was the one mainly concerned about the team tactics of Van Toerenhout and Iserbyt, always was the one trying to get himself through. So, those things are adding up on such a race. And, in my opinion, I think he was a little better than Michael Van Toerenhout. And in the end, Van Toerenhout got third place. So, little margins that can help your race get a podium, or you end up fourth. But I think overall he had a very good race, but yeah, it was just not enough.
So I think Sweeck was just not fit and fresh enough going into this race. I don't think the team tactics played that much of a role. Yes, we saw 3 or 4 occasions of Paul Sauter letting the gap fall. We saw it on the 180-degree corners on the banking, but the others were really on top of their game. They knew that this would happen after Fayetteville. Paul Sauter played it down a bit. They didn't do too much of these team tactics compared to last week, and eventually it didn't cost too much energy because Iserbyt and Van Toerenhout didn't really block them. You could see that as soon as Sweeck made the move down the inside, they didn't get their shoulders out. They were just like, okay, well, this time it didn't work out, and Sweeck could close that 1 second gap fairly easily. I just think that he didn't have the legs today, and there's no shame in that, because after travel, and I mean, yes, maybe if he has only the eyes on the World Cup, he shouldn't have gone to Ardooie. Maybe he didn't go full out, but even if you race at 95%, it's still going to be in your legs this weekend. So I think that's that for Sweeck, and I mean, if he gets some nice starting fee there to race Ardooie, why not? He also needs to think about his financial situation, and he was already missing Beringen because he didn't get the starting fee he wanted. So maybe that's just a sign that Sweeck is also looking at the starting contract. And Ardooie, it is actually a quite tough race through the Belgian city. Well, is it a city? No, more a village of Ardooie. So I think that's that for Sweeck. And ultimately, third or fourth, I think he doesn't really care too much. He looked to be racing for the win, and once that wasn't there, his head went down a little bit. Let's talk about Quinten Hermans then. He also raced that race in Ardooie we just mentioned. He won that race, started his cross season there. Today a 5th place in the World Cup. What is your opinion on his race today and his general form? How does that seem to be going for him?
I don't think it was that bad for Hermans. It looked quite well, especially in the beginning of the race. You saw that he was up there at the front, and overall it looked very good. But you could see on his face, especially at the later part of the race, that it was kind of a shock to his body maybe or something. But he looked okay. I think that you cannot really compare his win in Ardooie to this race. Ardooie was definitely a race that was a little lower competition, and you get more the chance to get into a certain rhythm. And here in Tabor, there was definitely no chance. The pace was up, and you have to try to get in a rhythm. And I think that rhythm is something that he's lacking right now. But it's not a bad result. Definitely something where you shouldn't be worried about today. And this is promising for the rest of the races that he's going to do.
The endurance of Quinten looked really promising. Towards the end of the race, there were no signs of him really dropping off, which we have seen with some other riders in previous seasons starting their season, that really they're able to match the front runners for the first 40-45 minutes. But in the final 2 laps, they just completely explode and drop towards the back end of the top 10. I couldn't see any of that. He even looked to be coming a bit closer towards Van Toerenhout and Van der Haar/Sweeck in the final phases of the race. Ultimately had to settle for 5th, but I think that's just a sign that the race intensity is missing a bit. We have seen riders like Iserbyt, Van Toerenhout, really the front runners. They've been racing for weeks now, over a month. Every week they have a hard race, a hard training session in the midweek, usually in Lichtenvoorde. So for Quinten, who's just started, hasn't done too much prep so far, it's looking promising. And I think that with these coming races, next week Ruddervoorde, then Maasmechelen World Cup, and then the Koppenberg, I think he's doing 2 or 3 out of those races. He's definitely going to find an extra bit of form. having an extra bit of freshness, and it's looking really promising for the European Championships in Namur. So I think that he could definitely get a good result there. And of course there's still the race in Woerden, which is already the day after tomorrow, so it's on Tuesday. This will really help him get into a good form, and I think that he is definitely within a shot of the European title in Namur.
Yeah, I mean, for Herman's endurance was definitely not lacking in this race. Like you said, there was not really this drop at the end of the race. He was quite able to stay close to the guys in front of him. And that is, in a way, is logical because of his campaign on the road. If you look at the races that he has done already, Hermans is really becoming a big guy on the road, and you will take that with you, obviously, in cyclocross. And I think that it was just a bit visible today that the rhythm was not really there, especially in the later part of the race. It was kind of almost a shock to his body. Add up to that the barriers, he had to run them, the others could jump them. Those are things that add up on this race, and then I think that you can only conclude that it's a good start for him, and that with a couple of races in, that the rhythm will come, and hopefully, I think definitely he will be one of the guys to look out for on the European Championships in Namur.
Yeah, that running of the barrier certainly cost him a bit of extra energy every lap, especially the closing of the gap afterwards. So I think both he and Lars van der Haar, who looked to be the only front runners needing to run the barriers, did a good job to end 2nd and 5th respectively. Let's look at our entire top 10 then. We of course had that win of Iserbyt ahead of Lars van der Haar and Michael van Toerenhout. 4th place for Laurens Sweeck ahead of Quinten Hermans. 6th place for Jens Adams ahead of Niels van der Putten. Then we find Kevin Kuhn, the Swiss champion, in 8th ahead of the Czech champion Michal Boros. And the top 10 is rounded off by Thijs Aerts. Some interesting names here in the top 10. Personally, I would like to highlight Michal Boros. He was one of the only riders able to stay with the front runners, the group of Iserbyt, basically in the first part of the race. Eventually dropped back a bit, maybe got a bit ahead of himself, carried by the Czech fans because they were really cheering them on loud today. From the junior race onwards, all the Czech riders, but also the Hungarians and the Slovakians, they really got cheered on. So I think he maybe got a bit ahead of himself due to that. But a 9th place is a continuation of what is so far a pretty strong season, because last week in Fayetteville he was already in the top 10 as well. Definitely an upwards trend for Boros.
That looks definitely promising from Boros. When you race in your own country, that will give you an extra boost, and that will probably also give you a little too much confidence, a bit of overconfidence, and that was kind of visible in the race. He was starting very well. Was one of the only guys from the last part of the top 10 that that was able to hang on in the beginning of the race with the guys in front, and eventually that cost him a little bit. But happy for him that he got the top 10 in his home country. That's definitely, I guess, something that he really wants to achieve, and it looked very good from his side. And if he's able to maintain the races, the results that he's doing right now over the course of the season, then I think he's going to look forward to a very good season.
For the rest, in the top 10, Van der Putten and Kuhn, kind of where we expect them. Maybe Jens Adams, did he perform above your expectations?
Yes and no. But I mean, Adams was definitely somebody that in the beginning of the race was not really showing himself. He made sure that the others were closing the gaps. The guys like Van der Putten and Kevin Kuhn were the ones that were trying to close the gaps, and Adams was just playing it a bit smarter. His results, he had some difficulties in some of the races, but I think today he was having a good day, and he played it very smart, and he made sure that he wasn't using that much energy in the beginning of the race. That eventually eventually brought him in a position where he could snatch a 6th place, and I think that is only good from his side, and a smart and good race from his side as well.
Adams was of course already pretty good last week in Oostenrijk, where he got the 2nd place behind Ryan Kamp. This week he beat Ryan Kamp, so his form has definitely been improving a bit. I think there's been some sort of physical issue with his back this season, because early on in the season, in the exact crosses, it was a bit up and down in terms of his results. He had the DNF in Beringen because of back issues. He got, I think, a 10th place in Meulenbeke, which was not exactly what he had hoped for. and now he ends 6th. It's a good result, and I think it's kind of where you would normally expect Adams to be, but because of these bit fluctuating results in the early phase of the season, we were wondering, well, is Adams really struggling with the new generation, with the under-23s, who of course rode their separate race today, or is he simply just having issues and whatever? So I think overall it's what you would think Adams is capable of based off last season, but it still needs to happen. Outside of the top 10, still some very brief interesting results. The first Spaniard in the race is actually not Felipe Orts, who ended 16th after a second place in Ardooie. It was Kevin Suarez Fernandez, who had beaten Orts a couple of times in the Spanish CX races this winter. He ended 14th. And whilst we're looking at the 14th, 15th and 16th places, behind them we see the 17th place for Zdeněk Štýbar, the 3-time cyclocross world champion. Let's go and talk about the women's race then. The women's race was similar to the men's race in a way, with a faster start for Marie Schreiber as usual, and after that we had a big pack for the first lap, and that got drained to a smaller group, and eventually we had an attack by Puk Pieters around the halfway point of the race when she attacked, and only Fem van Empel and Annemarie Worst were able to follow. They got rejoined in the lead by Seindo Carmen Alvarado, Sherin van Anrooy, Denise Betsema and a couple of other riders, but eventually it was clear that these riders were clearly the strongest. They were able to ride away from the rest and went into the last lap together. In that last lap, Puk Pietersen knew that her power was the bunny hopping of the barriers. She wanted to be in first there, but Annemarie Worst knew that she needed to prevent that. So, as we were approaching pit 1, Annemarie Worst took the lead from Puk Pietersen after the stairs. But Puk Pietersen tried to launch it down the inside into the corner before the barriers, but once she returned to the racing line, Annemarie Worst sent it back down the inside again, causing Puk Pietersen to brake, leading Fem van Empel to also pass her. Puk Pietersen went into the barriers third, meaning that she could jump but couldn't open a gap, which meant that for her it was a lot more difficult to win the race. She did still try to attack, but eventually Fem van Empel was still the freshest, who had basically done no work for the entire race. She placed an attack in the final quarter of the lap and rode towards victory. Pretty convincing in the end. Fem van Empel, second place for Puk Pietersen and third for Annemarie Worst. Fem van Empel taking the third World Cup win of the season, just as in the men's side her teammate Iserbyt did. Not really a surprise seeing her form, but what is your thought on the way that she rode the race, Issam?
A very smart and strong race from Van Empel. With Van Empel, you know that in the last lap, that she has a very good fast lap at the end, and it's difficult to, if you're not getting rid of her in the race, then it's going to be a very difficult task to hold her off in the last lap, and that's what we saw today. It was definitely visible that Van Empel was just a bit stronger than the others, and it's just a bit more explosive and faster in that last lap. From the beginning of the race, he was kind of in control and knew where the race was heading. She didn't really try to get a gap. When the others tried to gap her, she was always there. Especially when Worst and Puk Pietersen were ahead and had a gap. There was only one other cyclist that was with them in their wheels, and that was Van Empel. So, yeah, that she took this race very smart and intelligent, and was able to eventually win the race.
Van Empel goes into all the races in a very luxurious position. She knows that she has the fastest sprint out of all riders. Maybe next week that changes when Marianne Vos lines up in Maasmechelen. She's starting her season the day after tomorrow in Woerden. But then, for now at least, Van Empel can start the race knowing that she has the fastest sprint, is also capable of powering away in the final lap. So how do you race against Fem van Empel? It's very difficult. Today Puk Pietersen had one weapon, the barriers. Ultimately she got denied by Annemarie Worst. Worst did try everything she could to put Van Empel under pressure, but it's almost impossible to drop Van Empel here. There was only one moment going into the final lap that she was called out. She was at the back of the group, but then she has the control and ability to stay calm and just pass the riders in front of her, so she ends up in the wheel of Puk Pietersen when it matters, before they came to the first set of stairs. It's very difficult to race against Sven van Empel at the moment. She just has all the cards and she can play them whenever she wants. I think that to beat Sven van Empel, really the conditions need to change. It needs to become muddier, or there need to be a lot of technical features on the course, or we need to go to a superb climbing course. And even then, I'm not sure how you're going to beat Sven van Empel with such a sprint in the end. Of course, it's no given that she will be able to maintain this form for the rest of the season, or that others won't be able to improve, because for Puk Pieterse this is just her second race of the season. It is very much possible, and I do think so, that she will improve. I think she will become stronger and will eventually be able to compete even more with Sven van Empel. But it's just super difficult on a faster course where the draft really plays a role to drop her, and then she just has the sprint, or today the freshness at the end of the race to just simply drop you. So I don't know, how do you see it going forward? How should the other racers approach Sven van Empel? How should they try and tackle her? Especially now, which I didn't mention so far, Lucinda Brandt is going to be out for at least a couple of weeks because she crashed during the pre-ride yesterday and broke some bones in her hand.
Definitely think that is someone that they will miss, because Van Empel is definitely somebody, or Brandt is definitely somebody that can push Van Empel with power. She can make Van Empel's life a little bit more difficult in the races, and they will miss her. Vorst was really trying to make sure that she was ahead of Puk Pieterse in the barriers, and she did that very well. And then for Pieterse, she had to take that advantage on the barriers. But then Van Empel is always able to just go with them, and then in the end, doesn't even feel the attacks that the others are doing in a way. Yeah? She's just able to always race her own race, and definitely today. I think that you can maybe see that the likes of Alvarado and Vash and maybe Vorst are going to help each other a little bit more and work a little bit more with each other against Van Empel. But it's a tough situation for them. It's very difficult to race against somebody that is able to race with you till the end, and then you already know that in the last lap it's going to be very difficult to beat them. So I hope that this is not going to be a situation for the rest of the season, but it's possible, and yeah.
But do you really think that there will be a collective pack against Sven van Empel? Because I don't think so. We saw it in the US CX series where there was talk of an American pack against Bastans, but when it really mattered the most, it was just everyone for themselves. Because, yes, Alvarado and Pieterse might work together because they ride for Alpecin, but what benefit does Puk Pieterse have of letting Annemarie Vorst go and then Vorst taking the win? She then ends third instead of second or first. There's, in my opinion, no benefit for them to work collectively against Sven van Empel.
I don't expect it to be a collective, or at least something that is, that's going to be systematic over the course of the races. But it wouldn't surprise me if we are going into some races where, one of these riders that I already mentioned, like an Alvarado, will have a chance to get away. And then they will obviously maybe look at Van Empel a little bit more and say, well, it's up to you now to bring the gap down and close the gap for us. But for such a scenario, you obviously have to get in such a scenario first. And I don't believe that we're going to see this in every race. But it's definitely, it's possible. You never know when such a situation can happen. It can even happen even in the championships. And then it will be very crucial. So, everybody knows now that Van Empel has a very good sprint and a very fast last lap, and that can actually work against you over the course of the season.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, because it's normal. Van Empel now looks to be the leading woman of the cyclocross sport. It's normal that then more eyes turn to you. You are the leader of the World Cup. You are wearing that jersey, so yeah, it's up to you to fix the situation. You are clearly stronger, and I'll sit in. That can happen, but I still, as you say, I don't think there will be a collective pack against Van Empel. On Van Empel, still a final part. She is still officially registered as under-23 rider for these World Cups. We are approaching the European Championships in Namur in 2 weeks' time. Do you think that she will be racing in the elite category there, or will she race in the under-23 category?
I think she will do the elites. Brandt is obviously probably going to be missing there in the European Championships. We have obviously Prevot that will be adding, and some others that will also be there, but it depends on the sponsors as well, what they want. Do they want Van Empel in under 23 championships, or do they really want her to see already with the elites? The under 23 is definitely not going to be a guaranteed championships, but it's maybe more likely that she will be champion in the under 23 category than in the elites category. But it's a question at the moment. But if you look at Van Empel right now and the results and the way she's riding under the elites, I think that the elites will be the choice.
She has to. She wins 5 out of 6 races, 3 out of 3 World Cups against the top of the top. What's there to gain for her? She's already become world champion under 23. You never get to wear that jersey except at the European Championships. If you become a European champion, you never get to wear that jersey unless there's a separate national championship, which there isn't. So there really isn't anything to gain for her by racing the under 23, and she certainly has the level to compete for the elite title. I guess the only argument that you could make, and that's also what she's been making, is that it's a definitive choice. It's definite, and it means you can't go back. So with Vash last year, we saw that she made the decision after a very strong start to the season, win in Overijse, and then ultimately towards the end of the season, when she didn't have the form she maybe would have wished, that she still was able to race the Worlds in the under 23 category. So I do still think that despite that it might backfire this year if you have a bad end to your season, she really has proven to have the level to race for the elites, so that's what she should do. Puk Pieterse, after a second place today, I think the same goes for her. She should also race with the elites, and then we're left with Van Ardooie, which then raises the question what's there left for her. But I think that's more of an open question because she was 7th today, hasn't had a great start to the season, but it's also a very young season for her, starting only in Ardooie. So I think she will postpone the decision towards the World Championships. Let's talk about the race then again. Tabor, Puk Pieterse. Last year we spoke about it that at some point she would be winning races due to jumping the barriers. We have now seen that Fem van Empel is able to jump planks that are 10 centimeters lower than we had here today in Tabor. Blanca Vash, she was jumping the barriers in the pre-ride but didn't make it over the second one. It's interesting because I think that if you are on a flat set of barriers, she will be able to jump the leads, which would be a very nice improvement and interesting to see. But today, Puk Pieterse, she wasn't really able to use the weapon of jumping the barriers in a similar way as she did last year. Last year she used it every lap and ultimately wasn't fresh enough to launch an attack in the final lap. This year she looked to have learned from that. She was waiting a bit in the middle of the pack. She tried gaining confidence by jumping them, saw that she could open a gap and then wanted to wait for the last lap. That didn't work out. Do you think that she could have done anything different, or was it just a very bold move by Annemarie to come towards the barriers in first position?
I think the crucial part, obviously, we kind of knew for her was to be going over the barriers first in the last lap, and like you said, I mean, Vos really tried everything to make sure that she was not going to be first there, and when you're not first on those barriers, you still will have some sort of an advantage because the others have to get on their bike again and clip in, and that can sometimes take a little bit longer than usual. And but for Pieterse, that was definitely her weapon in the last lap. But I think if you look at her race overall, second place was, in my opinion, the highest achievable for her today. And yeah, then you can say that some things could have gone a little bit different, but I think in the end she fell in her place in second, and that was the highest achievable for her this race. Yeah, you said that she learned a lot from last year, but I think there was definitely some elements that shown from last year into this year.
We could see that she took quite some initiative in the early phases of the race, but I really think that was her only option. We had a pack of 14 leaders after 2 laps, and that's not something that is a good situation for Pieterse. Pieterse needs to have a smaller group, and then she could play her card, which was the barriers, and ultimately that didn't work today. But then again, it's only her second race of the season. I think I could spot a bit of form missing Could see that out of corners. She didn't have the acceleration that we're used to seeing from her yet, but the technique is there, and I thought it was wonderful to see yesterday when we had the training session that she was almost giving a masterclass on these barriers. She was seeing riders that were hesitating, and she was like, "Oh, come on, Anna Kay, try it. You can sit in my wheel, I'll draft you in, and then you just need to jump, and I know you can jump them because you've done it before." I don't know. And then she heard that one of the juniors, Laura Molengraaf, was afraid. And Molengraaf rides for another trade team. She rides for the Tormans team. And then what does she do? She goes and finds Molengraaf, and then she gets Molengraaf in her wheel and eventually gives Molengraaf the confidence to jump the barriers, which actually made the difference today, because Molengraaf won the junior women's race because she was able to jump the barriers. Molengraaf jumped them in the final lap, whilst Hladíková from Slovakia, who ended second, was not able to jump them. There was a gap of 5 seconds there, and in the final lap Hladíková was not able to close that gap anymore. She was also trying to help Vash jump the barriers, so it was super fun to see that and really a wholesome moment. So yeah, I think overall Puck Pieterse is definitely in a relaxed environment, seems happy at Alpecin, and the form will improve a bit. And then we'll see at the Europeans if it's enough for a title, or we'll see it later in the season. Let's look at our entire top 10 then. Fen van Empel taking her third win of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup ahead of Puck Pieterse and Annemarie Worst. Fourth place for Denise Betsema ahead of Catablanca Vash. Then we had Ceylin do Carmen Alvarado in sixth. A couple of mistakes in the final lap ultimately cost her the chance of ending on the podium. Seventh place for Sherin van Anrooy ahead of Inger van der Heijden and Aniek van Alphen. And then we see Marie Schreiber ending 10th. I think in the top 10, not that much interesting happened. We already discussed Van Anrooy, Van der Heijden, Van Alphen, kind of way you expect them. But let's talk about Vash. We saw that she ended second last week in Oostenrijk, then won in Ardooie. She's fifth here today in her first World Cup of the season. I definitely think that Vash is improving in terms of form throughout the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, you can definitely conclude that, I guess. Especially in the beginning of the season, I was quite, myself at least, I was quite critical about the transfer to SD Worx, or at least what came out of it so far. And I think right now you can see that it's getting somewhere. It looks way better. She is improving, obviously. It's almost like everything is getting in some sort of a flow. She's feeling, I think, very well, and you can see that on the bike. It looks good. It looks promising. The results are there. Today, she was able to race with the rest at the front. She had to close that gap when the three went away with Worst, Van Empel, and Pieterse. She had to close the majority of the gap, and then Betsema at the end made sure that they closed it. But I think that cost her a little bit of energy, and especially for the last lap, that just, you ruined kind of her chances in the to get a higher position. But overall, I think she can be very happy with the result, and this promising for her what's going to come in the next coming races in the season.
The approach they took seems to have worked very, very well in terms of confidence. The racing of the Toy Cup, races in the Czech Republic, close to her home, some friends and family over to watch, that seemed to have worked well, and getting the wins there seems to have boosted her confidence. Last week in Oostenrijk, that second place, she looked super happy after the race, seemed a bit gutted about some mistakes she made, but was confident enough to talk to us in English, something that's been different in the past couple of years. Seemed to be getting really settled, and that's a good sign, because you need a rested and fit mental situation before you can actually focus on delivering some enormous physical performances. So definitely a solid result, and Tabor, let's be honest, it's not the best course for Vash. We know that she does best if there's a bit of mud. Courses like Overijse that include some climbing, which she won last year, of course, are also very good for her. So I think the best part of the season for her is still to come. Do we still want to discuss anybody else in the top 10?
Not really, but if I had to mention one person outside of the top 10, I think Casasola was definitely ones to mention. I think for the entire race she was able to stay within the top 10 and show her team colors. But at the end, Schreiber was just able to get the 10th place, and she was finishing out just outside the top 10. But I think overall for her, it was definitely a strong race for her, a strong race from her, and that's definitely an honorable mention, I guess, for this race. Someone outside the top 10.
Yeah, I think it was nice to see that fluo yellow jersey from Casasola surprisingly be in that leading group, but ultimately Schreiber deserved that last spot in the top 10. If you get those fast starts week in, week out, make us excited today by putting an attack in the first lap, I'm happy to see you end in the top 10. And Schreiber now getting her, I think it's her first ever World Cup top 10, definitely improving in the team of Bart Wellens. So yeah, I think Schreiber, if Van Empel and Pietersen decide to race the under-23s Europeans in the elite category, then Schreiber is definitely a shout for a podium there, which I think would be a surprise for herself, because last week she seemed a bit, I wouldn't say nervous about her performances, but she definitely didn't have confidence. She was saying, yeah, I didn't feel great, but how come that the last couple of races haven't been going the way I want to? I thought I could do better. I could do as I did in the first exact crosses of the season. And now she did what her coach, Bart Wellens, predicted. He said last week, next week you go to Tabor. It's a course for you. Last year you already got a top 20. I think this year you can get a top 15, and if you have a good day you can get a top 10, and at the end of the day she's in the top 10. I think both she and their team will be very happy with that. Let's talk briefly about some of the youth races then here in Tabor. The men's under-23, men's junior and women's junior World Cups had their first round here. In the men's under-23 race, Thibaut Nys won ahead of Jente Michels in a sprint. Third place went to Emiel Verstringen, fourth place to Joran Viseur, and fifth place to Pim Ronhaar. I think it was most interesting here that Pim Ronhaar seemed to have a bit of a tough day, ending fifth. I think that the last 2 weeks are definitely not what Pim Ronhaar had hoped for. Of course, he had that chain snapping in the start section of the Fight-Wheel World Cup, and then now fifth. I think he came here with the goal to win. So then a fifth place is a bit of a disappointment, but perhaps the travel, or maybe just Thibaut being super strong.
Yeah, or maybe a combination of both. I mean, there was no broadcast of the under-23 race, so we not really know what happened there. But I think from a Ronhaar, definitely, if you look at the results already, and then just from himself, you can expect that he should be able to bring up some sort of fights to the best of the under-23, and also Thibaut Nys. I mean, it's definitely, if you look at the previous results. His results were in some parts, some races equal or sometimes even better. So I think they're quite equally matched at the moment, and normally he should have been able to bring up the fight, but obviously maybe it wasn't a good day. Maybe the travel from the United States back. We've already heard that, Van der Haar was ill for 5 days already. So before the race, in the preparation towards that race. So, maybe Ronhaar had something similar, or, was not really feeling well. Still had to digest the travel from the States. They can all be playing a factor and a role in such a race. And, like we said, I mean, for these guys under 23, it's very hard to always perform at your best and be consistent in all races. You have the highs and the lows, and I think that this is maybe just a race that was a bit more likely to be a low, and hopefully over the course of the season he will have more of those highs in the upcoming races.
Yeah, we come back to that keyword that we seem to mention every week, consistency for young riders. We can't expect it to be there, but eventually it will come over the years. I think you mentioned some ups and lows. I think certainly a rider that had an up was Andrew Strohmeyer. He ended 6th today, and that was, at least for me, a big surprise, because yes, he had done some races in the USA, the USCX series, but he was 7th in one of the Go crosses in Virginia, and then 7th in the Charm City Cross, day 2. But this is still a big step up, because almost all the under-23 riders were there, and 2 7th places is definitely not something that, for me, indicated, oh, this is somebody who's going to end in the top 10. I'd expected a bit more Dutch riders in the top 10. David Haverdings, Danny van Lierop, Del Grosso. These riders, expected them to end ahead of Andrew Strohmeyer, but definitely a good result for the American of the CX Hare's development team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and these are this is the highest category for the under 23 to race at. So if you're able to perform at such a race and surprise in a way, that's the best thing that can happen to you, and you have to take those chances, and you can bank those results, cherish it for the rest of the season, take it with you for the rest of the season, and build up on that.
If we then go to the women's junior race, I already gave a brief summary of what happened there. Laura Molengraaf took the win ahead of Gladonova. I was super impressed by Gladonova. She is just the first year, and she looked super strong on the climbing sections on today's course. She managed to close a gap almost every lap on Laura Molengraaf, who had the technical advantage on the barriers. So yes, we had Gladonova on our radar. We even told about you a couple of weeks ago when she won in Slovakia and got some good results in the Toy Cups. But still, a second place here is above expectation. I thought she would be able to get a top 10, but to beat Fleur Moors and Eva Holmgren, definitely 2 riders who have made some name and fame in the junior scene already in the past 2 years, is definitely a step up. Fleur Moors ended 3rd ahead of Eva Holmgren in 4th. For the rest, not really too much interesting going on in the top 10. Definitely some names that we have seen up there in terms of second years. Venturelli was there last year as well, Van Sinai, Isabel Holmgren, Laskova in 10th, and then I think it was interesting to see some of the first years. That's always what, for me, is the most interesting thing at the first World Cup. So we saw some new names. We saw Guéry from France there, and then we saw Amandine Mullier, another French rider, in the top 10. And just outside of the top 10, we saw Vida Lopez de San Roman, partly American, partly Spanish rider, was here with the Eurocross Academy. She was not super content about that result, but I mean, I saw some other riders who ended in the low end of the top 10 that weren't happy either, but I'm then thinking, at least to myself, it's the first World Cup of the season. Some of you have never raced at this level, so take some time, the results will come, and that goes for plenty of them. Fleur Moors was absolutely not happy with that 3rd place, but yeah, I don't know how you think about that, but maybe these riders are just loading themselves with too much pressure.
But it's also important that it's not a bad thing to have to put yourself, to put pressure on yourself and to not be happy with the results. If you're realistic, you can always use those, your dissatisfaction with the results, and try to build up from that and improve over the course of the season. But for these juniors and under 23s, it's becoming more and more important to have these good results, because the professional teams are starting a little younger now, younger and younger in a way, and for them, they need to perform at those standards to make sure that you can get a contract or get in touch with a professional team, and that will obviously add some pressure on these under 23 and junior riders. So you need to make sure that you have the right people around you that will guide you through this process. And from one part, it's very important to have those results, but on the other hand, you also need to have you need to enjoy what you're doing, and sometimes you're wondering in some sort of, in some moments, if they actually have still the joy in the sport, or it's purely based on those results. So I wouldn't really you can be critical about a result, but you shouldn't be caring too much about them, and try to just get the best out of the season and enjoy it.
Well, all the riders are ultimately driven by passion, because without passion there's no way you're going to be putting that many hours in on the bike. But it's not, yes, it's true that teams look younger and younger. Fleur Moors is already in the Paul South structure, but talent will always come through. It doesn't matter if you have a very bad year or even a very bad 2 years as a junior. If you are talented, then you will still come through as an under 23, or sometimes even only when you're an elite, and then you will still be picked up. So it should definitely be about joy, and yes, you can hope for better, but ultimately fun should be the most important part. So I don't know, I feel like ultimately, as you say, you should have the right people around you, and they should be telling you if you got a top 10, but even if you got a 15th place, or it doesn't even matter where you finished, if you've learned lessons from it as a junior, that's the most important thing. You need to learn and move forward from that and learn those lessons. To end off the Tabor section, we can look at the men's junior race. We had Leo Bissot, the number 3 of the European Road Race Champions, take the win. He led for, I think, almost the entire race. Home rider Václav Jezek took second place, ultimately in the final lap, edging out Victor van der Bergen and Jordi Corses for that place. Fifth place went to Ian Ackert, and I think that we still need to mention Andrew August, the American. He ended 10th. He needed to line up on grid row 7, had a crash in the first lap, and then ultimately managed to get forward with a 10th place. If he has a better starting position next week and Maasmechelen and is able to put in a similar performance, he could certainly end in the top 5, because he was lapping the same pace as Leo Bissot for almost the entire race. Certainly an impressive performance by him. Let's look at some other races in Europe. Today there was the second round of the Coupe de France in Nome. Gerben Kuipers took the win in the men's race ahead of Sandy Dujardin and Loris Roulier. On the women's side, Clara Honsinger took the win ahead of Zoe Baxet and Amandie Foucounet. There was also racing in the UK, the second round of the national trophies in Falkirk. The results of the men's race are not in yet, but Millie Cousins won the women's race ahead of Alan D. Baker and Isabel Stradi. If we look in Switzerland, there was also a race that was won by Jorben Lauwersen ahead of Thomas Verheyen and Marco Pavan. The women's race was won by Rebecca Garibaldi ahead of Jacqueline Snijblij and Lotte Bale. In Slovakia there was racing. Wart Huijps took the win ahead of Victor van der Putte and Martin Haring. The women's race was won by Pavla Halavikova ahead of Susanna Christine Stalla and Nikola Bajerova. Yesterday, King CX Day 1 won by Andrew Dillman ahead of Mark Miles and Sam Brown. The women's race was won by Caroline Mani ahead of Lizzie Gunsholz and Jenna Lingwood. Yesterday, on the first day of the Coupe de France, we had the same winner. Gerben Kuipers took the win ahead of Joshua Dubois and Valentin Quillan. Women's race was won by Clara Honsinger ahead of Amandie Foucounet and Solène Bilouin. The first day of racing in Slovakia had Victor van der Putte as winner ahead of Wart Huijps and Matej Stransky. Hladikova won ahead of Bajerova and Christine Stalla in the women's race. Then finally the Estonian National Championships, Frank Aron Raglio and Mari-Liis Motus took the national titles. That should have gotten you up to date again. There is still racing ongoing in Scotland at the moment, and tonight there is the second day of the King's CX. Issam, that was it for the third round of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup in Tabor. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. That's a wrap, and good luck with the travel as well.
Yeah, we'll be traveling back. We'll look to be arriving at an alright time back in the Netherlands, being a good weekend out, and we'll be releasing some more content from this trip in the coming days. Unfortunately, this week we didn't have a preview because Kristina Zemanova cancelled the interview due to some unforeseen circumstances, but this week for Maasmechelen we will be bringing another preview podcast. Issam, once again, thank you for being here, so we'll be back this week with a preview for Maasmechelen. Goodbye.